Epsilon Eridani. 4 humans called it Rill for the 1,000 glittering grooves that ran like rivers. Across its glassy plains was a world of singing stone. By late afternoon, the dunes hummed with heat, and the spires along the horizon rang in thin, bell-like threads that turned the air to silk. The Alari said their planet was always mid-song and visitors were simply learning the chorus. Humans said it looked like a cathedral shattered across a desert, and both descriptions were true. The summit dome stood on a basalt promontory above the harbor plain, a hemisphere of clarity whose supports were braided Alari crystal. The crystal wasn't ornamental. It resonated, tuned to the speech organs of the hosts. When the Alari conversed, their words became architecture. Patterns flittered across the struts like frost, translating harmonic content into color. By agreement, the dome had been tuned for human standard as well, so that when a Terran spoke, the color shifted to a warm, readable amber. Joint protocols, shared light. 6-year-old Mina Salazar pressed both palms to the inner wall and watched Rill's sky magnify. Around her, her breath fogged the transparency and was instantly whisked away by the dome's climate field. Below, the harbor plain held a scatter of human shuttles and Alari gliders, their shadows long knives pulling toward night. Mina imagined she could hold them all between her hands, the way she cupped the glass beetles that sometimes crawled under the garden lights back on Luna. Her father was somewhere behind her, talking like a waterfall. He always talked like that at summits. The more nervous he got, the smoother his voice. Ambassador Salazar wore the deep blue of Terran diplomatic corps with a collar pin, shaped like a sliver of comet. And when he leaned forward, the comet flashed as though re-entering atmosphere. Mina loved that flash. It made him look like the hero of an old holo. And in exchange for resonance access to bands 17 through 25, he was saying, Earth pledges a stabilization fund. No, not alone. A gift. That Mina's attention veered. A cluster of Alari stood close to the base of a support strut, their bodies a lattice of angles faceted like lake ice. They had no faces in the human sense, but as they spoke, ripples chased each other through their facets, violet, green, a whisper of blue so expressive that Mina felt she could almost read their moods. The smallest among them was little more than a handful of plates and a filament spine, edges scorched from some recent event. It vibrated in small, furtive tremors, a nervous bird. Mina took a step closer to the Alari and was stopped by a gentle hand on her shoulder. Seda, her father's aide, kept her voice low. Stay on this side of the marker, Starlight. Protocol. It's just a little one, Mina whispered. Like me. Seda's smile was quick and tired. Even little ones here are council linked. Would you like to offer a greeting through the bridge? Can I? Mina peeked up at the Alari again. The small one had rotated a fraction. One lattice plane angled toward her in what she had learned was attention. Seda beckoned a mediator. The mediator was an Alari mid-form, taller, more complexly faceted, with a braided resonance core that glowed faintly white where it emerged from the chest, like a slow lightning strike. Child wish. It sang in gentle triads. A greeting, Seda said. Soft bridge only. My ward has practiced. The mediator's edges warmed to amber. Consent. Mina touched the resonance pad. It felt like a warm pebble and buzzed like a cat. Hello, she said carefully in the tonal syllables Seda had drilled into her during shuttle time. I'm Mina. I won't break anything. The little Alari quivered, then sang to notes, soft as rain. The pad translated on a delay, one human heartbeat behind. Mina. I am Lilt of Splinter. You can break some things. Breaking sometimes makes music. Mina giggled. We're not supposed to break the dome. Then we will break nothing important. Came the answer, the translation pad fluttering with a shy green dot behind them. The grown-ups continued in their language of math with gentlemen's edges. The Alari counselors, robed in prismatic membranes that shimmered with civic endorsements, conversed by modulating the dome's struts. Their words skittered across the structure in rippling equations. That meant things like food energy index, migration patterns, piracy risk. Humans supplied the calibration. Ambassador Salazar's voice became amber lattices that rose to meet the Alari patterns mid-strut, cross-referencing credit expansion and cooperative defense. The dome hummed like the inside of a tuned instrument, which it was. Mina drifted back to the wall. Lilt of Splinter oozed, clinked, or perhaps scurried along the floor. Minna could not decide on the best verb and stopped opposite her. On the other side of the boundary marker, close up, she could see that some of its facets had been clumsily rejoined. Micro-cracks laced them like frost. Where a human might carry a bruise, an Ilari carried a change in refraction. "Does it hurt?" she asked without the pad, forgetting until the words left her mouth that her voice wouldn't harmonize. Lilt of Splinter's surface flushed with trace violet, an Ilari sign for thinking. It touched the boundary with a shy edge, then withdrew. A moment later, the mediator translated, "Sometimes it hurts. Sometimes it sings differently. No one plans to sound like this." Minna pressed her hand to the clarity again, just above the boundary. "I like your sound." The Ilari didn't have mouths, but Lilt of Splinter managed to look pleased. The mediator hummed, "You are kind." The dome's color matrices shifted. Conversation sharpened. Somewhere in the harbor plain, a gull-shaped glider made of translucent quartz caught a thermal and spiraled. Minna followed it with her eyes. That was when the alarms started. They were subtle at first, a subharmonic thickening of the air that made Mina's molars ache. The Ilari all lifted a fraction, untuned legs. Seta's hand tightened on Mina's shoulder. The dome's struts darkened to a defensive hue the humans called iron black. To Ilari, it was the timbre of a throat clearing before a warning. Ambassador Salazar cut off a sentence mid-phrase. "What is that?" "Anomalous dissonance," sang the mediator, harmonics clipped. "Orbital complication, in plain terms, pirates." The words rippled through the council like the leading edge of a storm. Ilari began to hum together, seeking synchronization. Their society was a choir, no metaphor. Decisions emerged from resonance. Discord was not only unpleasant, it was ungovernable. Humans prided themselves on functioning amid chaos. The Ilari saw chaos as a structural failure of reality. Seta activated Mina's wristband. It clamped, snug and warm. A tiny shield icon blossomed across the inside of Mina's wrist like a sticker. "Stay with me. We go to the inner room. My dad is already going where he must." Seta steered her toward a side corridor that curled around the dome like a seashell. Behind them, armor shutters retracted from ceiling slots. The dome's clarity dimmed. The song lines outside the spires and their murmuring shifted pitch, a city-changing key. They nearly made the inner room. The first impact was soundless. A bloom of dust leapfrogged across the harbor plain. The second carried thunder bellying up against the dome, a bass roll that made Minna stagger. She clutched Seta's hand with both of hers, and Seta clenched back, fingers damp. "Raiders?" Ambassador Salazar's voice crackled in Mina's earpiece. The wristband relayed a private channel no one had given her permission to access. But the safety protocols were permissive in emergencies. Children were meant to be near the voices they trusted. "Eve, report." Multiple signatures came. Eve, the dome's human systems analyst, from somewhere overhead. "Signy cutouts, 5 ships, 1 frigate and for knives. They've masked entry behind a civilian freighter." Eve's voice was calm in the way Seta said only machines and saints could be calm. "Ilari resonance nets are up, but the raiders have anti-choir scatter. It's deliberate." The corridor shunted them into an oval antechamber with seats that molded to human frames, and anchoring points for those without. A handful of Terran delegates huddled there. Faces washed the color of old parchment under emergency lighting. Minna saw Ambassador Salazar moving along the other side of the dome, surrounded by Ilari counselors and human security. Their shapes blued and blurred as the transparency thickened, insulating against impact. The blast door began to draw down. A shard of brightness flickered and wedged. Lilt of Splinter pressed its thin body through before the door sealed, its edges rasping against the sill. It tumbled once on the floor and reassembled in a tight, anxious knot. The mediator, caught on the other side, sang something sharp that the translation pad rendered as a cascade of nonsense punctuation. The door thudded shut. "Minna," Seta breathed, half laugh, half sob. "You made a friend." Lilt of Splinter rose and steadied. It made a 3-tone chord like glass kissed by rain. The wristband caught it and translated with a different machine voice than the mediator's. "I did not wish to be alone." "Nobody does," Minna said. The next hit came slantwise. Somewhere, a strut took an impossible load. The floor yawed just enough to make everyone rethink their center of gravity, then caught itself. A second alarm sounded, not bass, but a fluttering treble that Minna recognized from safety drills as an air integrity warning. The dome had been designed to outlast ordnance. It would, but the antechamber was a less generous promise. Eve, Seda said into her sleeve. Route safest path to evacuation coil. A ribbon of light resolved along the floor, snaking from the door, up the curved wall, toward a hatch Minna hadn't noticed. Understood, Eve said. Civilians to coil 2. Ambassador, Ilari Council requests you remain in core to maintain cross-signal stability. Salazar's voice returned, thinner, confirmed. Minna, I'm here. Minna said loudly, then flushed, because everyone looked. Stay with Seda, her father said. Stay with. The channel cut to static. The pirates had found the dome's external repeaters. On the far wall, a vertical seam side open, revealing a tube lined with metallic petals. The evacuation coil smelled like cold rain. Seda moved to lift Minna and froze when Liltov's splinter touched the coil's lip with a hesitant edge. It won't carry your lattice, Seda said softly. It's tuned for. She broke off as the coil adjusted its pedal geometry in a tumble of clicks. Okay, maybe it will. Minna was first, small and easy to wrap in a pedal harness. Seda followed, one hand on Mina's shoulder, the other on the coil's guide rail. 2 other Terrans slid in behind them, shivering and silent. Liltov's splinter compressed its facets until it was beaded like a length of crystal rope, and threaded itself between Minna and Seda. Why are they doing this? Minna asked as the coil descended through the dome's stem. The air in the tube vibrated. She could feel words in it like a cat feels footsteps through floorboards. For money. One of the Terrans said bitterly. For the pleasure of breaking an agreement. For someone else's plan, Seda murmured. They're not clever enough to invent this antiquire scatter. Liltov's splinter produced a tiny, distressed chord. The band translated a heartbeat later. Scatter is theft. They are stealing our together. The coil opened into a service hall that could have been anywhere. Conduits, anchor points. Strips of biolite. On the floor, an Ilari adult lay in a pile of its own fragments, its resonance core pulsing weakly. A human security officer knelt beside the shards, hands hovering in the universal sign, for I want to help, but I don't know the first thing about this. Seda hissed through her teeth. Eve, we need a patch team on Corridor 16. Already routed, Eve said. Ambulatory Ilari en route with rejoin kit. Please avoid stepping in them. Yes, Seda said, steering Minna in a wide arc. Liltov's splinter paused long enough to brush a limb against the fallen adult, producing a low, steady tone that the band didn't translate at all. Some chords were not for humans. The adult's core pulse steadied fractionally. Good, Seda said. Go, go. They didn't make 10 steps before the lights shuddered. A new sound threaded through the corridor, a predatory whine Minna imagined as a hook, dragged across a star. Eve's voice sharpened. Breach in Service Hall 19. Repeat. Breach. The wall dissolving beside them was not an explosion so much as a negation. Material simply failed to be there. A shovel of absence scooped out of the corridor. Heat slammed into the space like breath over a bottle's lip. Where the absence closed, it left geometry that hurt to look at. Minna cried out. Seda shoved her backward. 3 shadows extruded through the gap. The first was a raider in a suit stitched from someone else's smarter fabric. Patches of different militaries seamed into a cruelty of camouflage. The second bore a rig with prongs that crackled in the wet air like summer insects. The third, smaller and quicker, had already stepped ahead of the others. Muzzle of a compact weapon creeping up to the human officer, who had the bad luck to be both brave and in the way. The first raider glanced over the group and dismissed them. Civilians. Not worth the munitions unless they resisted. Then he saw the Ilari child threaded protectively round a human girl and recalculated. Hey, he said over external speakers, his voice tinny, strangely friendly. Crystal Kid, you come with me. We take you home and nobody gets. Seda moved between the raider and Minna, without bothering to calculate anything. Her stance was practiced. The little safeties in her wrists clicked as implants aligned. You can shoot me, she said, but you won't get past me before I scream the walls down. Minna had never heard Seda sound like that. It was not brave so much as inexorable, like a door closing on someone's fingers. The raider sighed. "Lady, please." He lifted the muzzle. Liltov's splinter reacted before Minna understood the movement. A flare of facets that turned Seta's outline into a mosaic. The weapon discharged. The bolt should have bitten a hole into human flesh. Instead, it struck a surface that flowed to meet it, refracting the energy into a scatter of harmless light that pattered against the corridor like rain. It was not magic. The Lari were not shields by nature. But in the split second between intent and impact, something in Liltov's splinter changed. Some memory of heat and harm scrambled the lattice's instinct and remapped internal pathways. This face outward, this face backward. It did not think protect. It simply became the shape that made protection true. Down. Seta barked, and Minna dropped. The second raider lunged, prongs snatching at Seta's shoulder. Whatever crackle they carried meant to turn muscles to puddings. Liltov's splinter flowed again. The prongs kissed its surface and slid. Their charge conducted harmlessly along crystalline runs and dumped into the floor grid. Sparks chased like fireflies. The human officer did not waste the opening. She pivoted, slammed a palm into the third raider's wrist, and the compact weapon flew, clattering. "Go," she shouted. "Evac coil." Minna was up, heart galloping. Seta's fingers hooked in her collar. Liltov's splinter covered them like a cape of winter light that did not weigh anything. They ran behind them, the corridor filled with discord. The raiders shouted. Somewhere, an Alari's song arched into a note that made Mina's ears burn. Somewhere else, a human shouted a word that the wristband cut to static to save her parents a complaint later. Eve murmured directions into their bones, left at the fork, over the cable run, down the service stair. The hallways narrowed, then widened into a maintenance bay with a floor hatch yawning open. A spiral of anchors clung to the hatch's rim like barnacles. "Down," Seta said, and Minna climbed. As quick as she had ever climbed anything. The air below smelled like mineral water. Halfway down, the hatch above exploded. A gout of heat rolled down the shaft like a tongue. Seta threw one arm over Minna and braced. Liltov's splinter flashed incandescent and took the heat into itself. Something in it screamed, but only along frequencies no human ear could name. The next space was a resonance vault, a room whose walls shone with embedded crystal panels. This was where the Alari kept choir banks for emergencies, recorded chords that could be played back to stabilize a city's mood when the living choir was disrupted. Even to Minna, the room felt like the inside of a heartbeat. The panels pulsed a soft blue, keeping time. "Lock it," Seta said, and the hatch above sealed in a pedal of dull metal. "Containment engaged," Eve said. "Ambassador Salazar is safe. Council core holding. Pirate knives are testing perimeters, but Alari gliders have launched. Earth destroyer Valence is inbound from the far anchor." 16 minutes. Feels like forever, the human officer muttered, sliding down against a wall. Minna stood trembling in the center of the room. With the hatch sealed, sound returned to sane proportions. Her muscles reported delayed outrage. Her wristband's shield icon flickered and steadied. She turned to Liltov's splinter. Its facets were milky in places they had been clear. Microcracks had multiplied into a filigree of pain. It made a sound like a breath taken too fast. No human machine translated. Minna did not need the translation. She crossed the floor on unsteady legs and pressed her palm, very gently, to the smoothest facet she could find. "You saved me." Liltov's splinter's structure rippled. It leaned into the touch. "I did not wish to be alone," the wristband whispered belatedly, and then, softer, as though borrowing human grammar to mean something it did not quite have a word for. "I wished you to remain here, with your father, with your," a long cadence, impossible to catch. "Together." Minna swallowed. Her throat hurt. "Does it still sing differently?" Liltov's splinter made a tiny, affirming tone. "Yes, now it sings like this." It let her feel a ghost of the heat that had been, then dulled it with a counterchord. The pain settled into something else, not absence, not quite. A change in the way light moved through. Seta crouched beside them, her breath slowing. "Hey, Starlight," she said softly. "You okay?" Minna nodded, then shook her head, then nodded again in a way that said both things could be true. She looked up. The panels along the walls were flickering faster. "What are the blue lights doing?" stabilizing the city's harmonic profile. Seda said, "Think of it like if everyone panics at once, the whole planet goes out of tune." The panels hum a memory of calm back into the air. Does it work? Most of the time, the human officer, whose name Minna learned later was Corporal Teague, had closed her eyes but not to sleep. She was counting under her breath in a way that meant either prayer or training. The floor trembled. Not a blow, not the slam of impact. A shiver, as if the planet itself had received a chill. The panel's blue tinge wavered, then deepened. In the wristband, Minna felt frequencies, like fingers rearranging her hair. Eve spoke in their bones again. Update. Raiders attempting to sliver the choir bank vault from beneath. Suggest moving to secondary shelter. Seda looked at the hatch they had just sealed. Then at the opposite wall. There's no secondary shelter. There is, Liltov Splinter said. The words were clearer now, as if pain had simplified the channel. It flowed to one panel and touched a barely visible seam at the panel's edge. The seam chimed. A rectangle of wall softened to liquid and parted, revealing a cavity no bigger than an elevator and lined with the same crystal, but darker. The air within was cool and tasted like snow. Seda raised an eyebrow. Hidden compartment? Choir cradle, Liltov Splinter corrected. For first voices during storms. It rotated a facet toward Minna, a gesture that had come to mean come with me. I'm not a voice, Minna said without thinking. Then she realized that wasn't true. Not here. Not now. Seda hustled them in and crowded close. Corporal Teague slid in last, one hand on the edge of the opening. Eve, she said. Cradle detected, Eve replied. Good, it will carry resonance. What does that mean? Minna asked. It means, Seda said, and her smile was a tired thing that nevertheless had teeth. We hunkered down and let the Alari's oldest trick keep us from being shaken apart. The cradle closed. Darkness folded like silk. Then the walls lit with a gentle phosphor, and a tone suffused the air low, steady, as if a mountain had decided to hum. Minna felt her panic receding, not banished but layered under something older and more patient. Liltov Splinter pressed one facet against her shoulder. The facet warmed. Seda. Minna whispered, Was I brave? Braver than I like, Seda said. Don't make a habit of it. Outside the cradle the world continued to be perilous. Pirates with clever tools. Alari pilots slinging their gliders like knives of dawn. Humans on the ground holding lines, made of nothing more than courage and procedure. Inside, the hum went on. And in that hum, Minna learned something about the Alari they did not say on tour. That their together was not merely a technique, but a choice renewed at every tremor. Being a choir meant deciding, again and again, to be more than the self. That fear opened like a trapdoor. Time stretched into a thread. When Eve finally said, Valence on station, Seda sagged with a relief so sudden it made Minna dizzy. The cradle opened on a vault now lit with ordinary maintenance light. The scary geometry where the wall had been negated was gone, replaced by a patch that looked like a scar. There were Alari in the corridor. There were humans. There was the sound of post-storm voices. Ambassador Salazar came at a trot that tried to be dignified and failed, which made it perfect. He collapsed to one knee before Minna and gathered her so quickly. She had no time to choose whether to cry. The choice was made for her. She did, briefly, into his collar. He smelled like sweat and the metallic tang of adrenaline and his cologne, which was mostly cardamom. You're okay, he said into her hair. You're okay. He leaned back enough to look at her, then glanced at Seda, at Corporal Teague, at the little Alari whose facets were trying very hard to hold a shape. His mouth shaped thank you in a dozen ways and decided to say none of them, because none were enough. Instead he turned to the Alari around them, counselors with bruised light, glider captains with chips out of their edges, civilians whose lumens flickered with fatigue, and he raised his voice so that the dome could hear. And maybe beyond the dome the entire planet could hear through a skein of repeaters and choir banks. They shielded one human child, he said, and his voice was not smooth anymore. It was a stone. With their bodies, Liltov Splinter angled a facet toward him as if to say it had been nothing, as if to say it had been everything. Minna kept her hand on it, the way you keep a hand on a friend in a crowd so the crowd cannot separate you around them. The Alari sang back, not applause, not exactly. An answering chord, agreement in the key of a promise. The sound went up through the repaired struts and out across the harbor plain, where rescuers were still prying open crumpled gliders, and the Valance's shadow lay like a shield over the desert. It went further, too, in the way sounds go when they are true, into channels that would deliver this moment to rooms where votes were cast, to stations where fleets were built, to half-friendly worlds where people wondered what humans could be relied upon to do. In the days to come, Minna would learn the terms that would be forged from this our guardship, protected status, deterrence. She would watch as those words were strapped to ships like banners and to laws like chains. But in the vault with the cradle open and the air tasting of rain and glass, none of that existed yet. There was only a small Alari whose lattice had taken a wound and made of it a different music. There was only a human child who had been safely frightened and would grow into the fear and the safety both. There was only a father whose voice broke in a way Minna had not known it could break, because breaking sometimes made the necessary shape dot in that ring of light. In that humility of relief, a vow found its first, raw shape, still soft, still uncooled from the heat of impact, but sound enough to hold. Unreal, the dunes hummed, the spires answered. The planet, stubborn and singing, found its key again. The summit dome at Rill had been shattered and mended, its struts still bearing the smoky discoloration of weapons fire. Work crews, Alari crystal binders, and Terran engineers together swarmed like ants over the great hemisphere, tuning facets back into harmony. The pirates had been driven off, but scars lingered in both stone and spirit. For 3 nights after the raid, Minna Salazar woke in the ambassadorial quarters with Liltov Splinter pressed close against her cot, vibrating faint tones that steadied her heartbeat. The shardling no longer felt alien. It was simply there, like a sibling who had always belonged. Her father tolerated the arrangement without comment. Once he would have scolded her for breaking protocol. Now, he studied the little Alari as though it were a text written in fire. The diplomatic crisis that followed was not so easily soothed. The council in orbit. Coalition Council assembled in the orbital citadel above Luna 3 weeks later. To the casual observer, it resembled a massive ringed lantern, a disk of steel and crystal with spokes radiating from a hollow hub where shuttles drifted like dust motes in light. Every species that had signed the stellar concord kept chambers there, tuned to their environmental tolerances. Some chambers were breathable, some were more metaphor than matter, accessed only through resonance, dream bridges, or nerve link. Humans called the citadel the table of the stars. Ambassador Salazar had argued for an emergency session. He was not alone. Other Terran voices in the council pressed for recognition of what had occurred. But he was the one carrying the proof, a child still alive because of a crystalline body that had interposed itself between flesh and fire. Minna came to, against his better judgment. She stood in the Terran observation gallery beside Seda, gazing down at the amphitheater where the counselors sat. 1,000 murmurs overlapped, clicks, tones, breathy whistles, bass notes that shook the floor. Translation halos rendered it into human standard across her ears. But even then the weight of it pressed against her ribs. Beside her, Liltov Splinter gleamed faintly in the gallery lights. It had been granted a temporary diplomatic credential and outraged too many species, who saw it as little more than a larva, incapable of representing its people. Yet it was here, a symbol impossible to ignore. Minna held one of its facets, like she might hold a hand, too. The clash of voiced speaker of the council, a broad-limbed Vorok, whose skin resembled weathered stone, intoned the docket. Matter of Alari protection. Earth seeks elevation of status beyond existing concord terms. Proposal, guardship. A susurrus rolled across the chamber. Guardship was a word that had teeth. It meant binding responsibility, not just alliance, but defense to the death. It meant war, if challenged. The Alari counselor, a mid-form named Resonance of Deeptide, spoke first. Its chords trembled along the dome's channels. We did not request this. One shardling acted outside choir authority. Our people do not seek protection. Salazar rose, his comet pin gleaming under the council lamps. His voice carried not only through the translation halo, but in the cadence of someone who had rehearsed this moment in sleepless hours. Counselors, one of yours shielded my daughter when pirates breached the summit dome. Not with permission, not with preparation, by instinct. That act has already bound us tighter than treaties. You may say you do not seek protection, but Earth cannot pretend we did not witness it. From the gallery, Minna saw his shoulders stiffen. He looked taller than she remembered, though the skin around his eyes was worn thin. A hiss came from the Kethri delegation, serpentine forms coiled in their mist chamber. And so Earth presumes to annex protectorate rights over an entire species? Dangerous precedent. If every species that saves a human child earns a Terran fleet, then your favor becomes currency for manipulation. Salazar did not flinch. If every species shields a human child, then the galaxy will be better for it. A murmur, half approval, half outrage. The trine of Arcade. Beings of living flame, bound in gravitic harnesses, flared brighter. Words are not law. Guardship must be ratified, not declared unilaterally. Here Salazar paused, as if weighing diplomacy against something sharper. His next words cut like glass. Perhaps in law you are correct, but understand this, Earth's fleets already moved to defend Alari space. Our destroyer Valence is stationed above Rill. 2 more patrol groups are en route. The declaration is not a question. It is fact. 3. The Riftsilent stunned, appalled, reverent silence. Even the translation halos struggled to render the overlapping responses. Minna gripped Liltov's splinter's facet harder. Seda muttered a curse under her breath. Finally, Resonance of Deep Tide spoke again. Its tones were conflicted, wavering between acceptance and alarm. You claim us as yours? Salazar's answer was steady. Not as ours to guard. There is a difference. You shielded one of us with your body. Now we shield all of you with ours. That is how humanity answers. The Vorak speaker rumbled. Earth risks much. Do you offer this protection freely, or do you demand recompense? Freely, Salazar said, though his eyes flickered toward the Terran military attaches in the chamber. Though friendship brings its own rewards, for Mina's moment in the gallery. Minna could no longer stay silent. Her voice burst out, too high and too small for such a hall, yet amplified by the chamber's resonance pads. They didn't ask to save me, she said. They just did it. If we don't stand for them now, what does that make us? Every eye turned upward. Salazar's face paled, but he did not silence her. Liltov's splinter chimed beside her, producing a chord that rolled across the amphitheater like sunlight. Translation lagged, but the meaning was clear. Together, the chamber held its breath. Some scoffed, some looked away, but others, especially among the younger delegates, nodded slowly. The vote that wasn't technically. No vote had been called. The council was still deep in procedural argument when Earth's declaration spread across the relay networks. On distant outposts, human fleet captains had already issued communiques confirming Alari systems were under Terran guard. News feeds blared the image of a crystalline shardling standing protectively beside a human girl. The story wrote itself, and policy bent to its gravity. Within hours, it was clear, whether the council ratified or not, Earth had set the precedent. The Alari were now a protected people. Vi. Repercussions at night. Salazar walked the corridors of the orbital citadel with Seda pacing at his side. His expression was iron. You've painted us into a corner, Seda said. Guardship is binding. If the Alari are attacked again, we cannot stand down. You've committed Earth to war without consent. Salazar paused at a viewport where Luna shone, a gray curve against Earth's blue-white marble. Better war for the right reason than peace bought with cowardice. In the reflection, Minna appeared, holding Liltov's splinter. The shardling hummed low, steady chords. Seda sighed. History will judge. History is already watching, Salazar said. VII. The whispered question in the weeks that followed. Whispers spread across the stars. In taverns on trade stations, in backrooms of rival councils, in the deep signal bands of pirate factions. A single question repeated. If one of us shields a human child, will Earth declare us under their guard too? It was not a question with an easy answer, but it was the question that would reshape the balance of power in the galaxy. And in a quiet corner of the citadel, Minna pressed her cheek to the cool, faceted surface of her Alari friend and whispered, "We'll keep each other safe, always." The shardling sang agreement. and for a moment the galaxy seemed to listen. The pirate flotilla that struck Rill had not been a stray pack of marauders. Intelligence reports soon confirmed what Ambassador Salazar had suspected. The Cygnus raiders were hired. By whom? No one could prove. The pirates had been funded through fractured accounts bouncing across half a dozen trade networks. Their ships fitted with weaponry to refine for scavengers. But the message behind the attack was clear: punish the Alari for drawing Earth's notice. Seda read the classified summaries aloud in the ambassadorial quarters one night, while Minna pretended to sleep, curled against Liltov Splinter's warm hum. Antiquire scatter came from outside Alari space. Raiders couldn't have designed it themselves. Somebody wanted the Alari destabilized before the guardship declaration could take root. Ambassador Salazar leaned back in his chair, eyes shadowed. They miscalculated. Instead, they forged the guardship in fire. Seda's voice sharpened. Or they calculated perfectly. If they can't break the Alari, they'll bleed Earth dry defending them. Minna, eyes closed, tucked her hand tighter round Liltov Splinter. The shardling's vibration steadied, as if it could soothe away not only her fear but her father's. Fractures in the Sangan Rill. The Alari began to suffer in ways they had never experienced. Their crystalline spires, the song lines that carried their collective resonance, across continents were targeted by saboteurs. Some crumbled under carefully planted charges. Others were infected by resonance-distorting devices, broadcasting dissonant tones that made whole districts physically ill. For the Alari, harmony was not art, it was survival. Their sense of self came from the choir, their stability from the resonance web. To fracture a song line was to wound the species' memory. Humans stationed on Rill were the first to respond. Engineers learned to patch spires with alloy struts, imperfect but functional. Marines set up orbital shields above Alari cities, intercepting missile strikes before they could fall. Where once Earth had been tolerated as a partner, now Alari civilians looked up to the sky and whispered in crystalline chords, "Guardians." Minna accompanied Seda on visits to recovering spire communities. Children of facets no larger than her head clustered around, chimming curiosity. Liltov Splinter sang with them, bridging human laughter and crystalline resonance until the hall filled with tones that did not quite belong to either species, but carried hope nonetheless. "You've become an emblem," Seda told her on the shuttle ride back. "Not just your father, you." Minna frowned. "I didn't do anything. You survived," Seda said gently. "Sometimes that's enough to change history." 3. The hidden Enemyth enemy remained faceless. No polity admitted involvement. The Kethri denied funding the raiders. The Trine of Arcaith condemned the attacks publicly, even as Terran analysts noted unusual fleet maneuvers near Alari space. What Earth knew was this: every time Alari sang more openly with humans, sabotage followed. And every time sabotage struck, Earth's fleets were forced to expand their presence. It became a war of attrition without battlefields. Convoys vanished in the void. Relay satellites went dark. Trade networks froze under cybernetic assault. And in the shadows, the whisper spread: the guardship is a chain. Let Earth strangle itself with it. Ambassador Salazar spent sleepless weeks at the Coalition Citadel, countering accusations that Earth was overreaching. He returned gaunt, his voice raw, but his resolve sharper than ever. "They want us to back down," he told Seda, Minna, and the shardling in the quiet of his quarters. "But if we retreat, every vow Earth makes will mean nothing. If we falter here, no one will ever believe our word again." 4. Harmony in the Pyrite. Was during one of these dark weeks that the first resonance phenomenon was documented. A squad of Terran Marines defended a fractured spire against raiders, attempting to plant dissonance charges. The Alari defenders sang to stabilize the spire, but their voices faltered under fire. Then the humans joined in, not with words they understood, but with rough tonal shouts and heartbeat rhythms. The resonance pads strapped to their armor amplified the sounds. Somehow, improbably, the spire's vibration stabilized. Energy weapons fired at the defenders flickered, dissipating into harmless heat. When the dust cleared, Alari scientists reported an anomaly. The human voices had synchronized faintly with the Alari choir. Neural patterns resonated across species. The discovery spread like wildfire. Earth engineers built prototype choral harmonizers, devices that allowed human and Alari voices to mesh deliberately. Together, their resonance created barriers no weapon could easily breach. Minna and Liltov's splinter became the demonstration. In the great hall of the orbital citadel, before astonished delegates, the child's laughter and the shardling's crystalline cord intertwined. For one bright moment, the chamber itself shimmered with light no projector had cast. The council could not dismiss what they saw. Humanity and Alari had become more than allies, they had become instruments of one another's survival. The Earth's wrath faceless enemies learned quickly. The next attempted raid was met not with scattered defense, but with valence. And to Terran battlecruisers, their hulls dark and silent until they opened fire. The raiders scattered, but there was no safe harbor left. Earth had ceded Alari space with hunter drones. Relentless as wolves, whispers across the stars turn sharper. Strike the Alari, and Earth will come. Strike Earth's promise, and you will pay in fleets. For the first time in centuries, Terran warships flew not as enforcers or opportunists, but as guardians, and the galaxy watched in awe. And Fear.vi, symbols in the Stormina, grew taller in those months, her childhood blurred by the weight of history. Wherever she went, Alari children clustered around her, their facets chimming in playful chords. News feeds broadcast images of her walking beside Liltov's splinter, human hand on crystalline edge. She's more than a child now, Seda murmured to Salazar one evening, watching Minna on the feeds. She's the promise your words made flesh. Salazar only nodded, but his eyes shone with something fierce and weary all at once. Liltov's splinter, once a timid shardling, had grown too. Its fractured facets had fused into new patterns, luminous with inner fire. It no longer trembled when it sang. Its resonance, braided with Mina's voice, had become a banner one that enemies could not silence and allies could not ignore. The edge of Worth's sabotage did not stop. The shadow war only deepened. Yet the vow held. Earth would guard the Ilari dot, and every time the vow was tested, Earth answered with steel, flame, and song. Still, Seda whispered late at night when Minna was asleep, "We are standing on the edge of a greater war, one we cannot yet see. If they push harder, the guardship will draw us into open conflict, and then nothing will be unseen anymore." Ambassador Salazar would look out the viewport toward the stars, glittering like glass shards in the dark, and answer, "Then let them push. We did not choose this vow lightly. We will not break it." And somewhere on Rill, the song lines hummed again, scarred, patched, but singing still. The Alari capital spire of crystalline stood like a choir frozen mid-note, a cluster of crystal towers, leaning toward one another, their tips almost touching in a crown. It was here, amid refracted light and singing air, that the unseen war finally stepped into daylight. Pirate craft disguised as freighters pierced the planetary shield, their bellies splitting open to disgorge raiders with scatter cannons. At the same moment, hidden charges along the outer spires detonated, shattering resonance and plunging entire districts into panic. Minna was there. She had come to witness a harmonizer demonstration between Alari and Terran engineers, a celebration of what Earth and Alari could do together. Liltov's splinter at her side, Seda watching every angle, and Ambassador Salazar in formal robes. The first blast knocked the hall sideways. Transparent crystal rained like knives. Seda threw herself over Minna, but the harmonizer unit shuddered and nearly toppled. Liltov's splinter flared, wrapping its facets around both human and machine, absorbing the shrapnel. Its cords rang painfully in Mina's bones, through the collapsing din. Voices howled, "Strike the choir, break the guardship," but they had chosen their battlefield poorly. The Terran destroyer Valence was already in orbit. When the distress call sang upward, the ship answered with rail fire that lanced through pirate hulls. At the same time, Alari gliders, small, swift, crystalline wings that bent resonance like windrows from hidden bays. Together they struck with precision, human steel and Alari song. Neither sufficient alone, but devastating together. Minna clung to her father's arm as the attack faltered. She felt dimly that this was no longer about her survival. This was about the vow being tested before the eyes of all. Resonance unbound harmonizer device, damaged but intact, hummed louder than before. Sparks bled across its frame. Ilari technicians shouted chords of warning. Seda tried to pull Mina back, but Liltov's splinter surged forward, touching the harmonizer's core. Mina, her father barked, but the shardling's intent was clear. It needed her voice. Mina stepped forward, trembling but determined, and laid her hand on Liltov's splinter. She did not sing words, only sound, high and thin, a child's cry lifted into courage. The shardling answered, braiding her tone with crystalline resonance. The harmonizer flared. A wave of soundless force rippled outward. Pirate weapons discharged into nothing, their energy unraveling like smoke. The fractured spires steadied, shards knitting as though time itself reversed, all across Chrysalis. Ilari froze, heads tilted skyward. They felt it, a harmony that was not Ilari alone, nor human alone, but both entwined. The first true inter-choir. The pirates faltered. Some fled, some were captured. The survivors' broadcasts carried a single phrase, bitter and awed. They sing together now. 3. The reckoning. When the dust cleared, the coalition council demanded answers. Who had backed the pirates? Who had seeded scatter weapons? Who profited from destabilization? Evidence pointed in all directions, but never landed cleanly. Rival powers disavowed involvement, each accusing the other. Yet none could deny what the galaxy had witnessed. Earth and Ilari had forged a new force, one that no fleet could easily counter. Ambassador Salazar stood once more before the council. His voice was rough, his robes still scorched from the ambush. Mina and Liltov's splinter stood behind him. You feared guardship would be arrogance. He told the chamber. You feared Earth would claim a people as chattel. But look at Chrysalis. We did not command the Ilari to kneel. We stood beside them. We sang with them. Guardship is not chains. It is covenant. The chamber stirred. Some scowled, others nodded slowly. And in the gallery, younger delegates whispered again, if they shield a human child, Earth shields a people. IV. The shardling, and the child. Weeks later, peace if fragile returned. Spires rebuilt, songlines retuned. Valence and her sister ships patrolled Ilari skies, not as conquerors but as guardians welcomed with crystalline hymns. Mina found herself no longer just an ambassador's daughter. Wherever she walked, Ilari turned facets toward her in greeting. Children ran to hear her laugh. Liltov's splinter never left her side, its once fractured body now glowing with inner fire. They'll remember you too, Seda told her one twilight, not just for surviving, for proving what we could be. Mina hugged the shardling close. I didn't do anything alone. The shardling's chords rang soft, tender, and the translation pad whispered, together is stronger than alone. Beyond shield and Songth guardship held. The enemies who had sought to shatter it retreated into shadow, wary now of what their interference had birthed. Ilari and humans built harmonizers in every major city, tools not only of defense, but of shared celebration. When the choirs sang, human voices were woven in as naturally as crystal vibrations. For Mina, childhood ended early, but not in grief. She and Liltov's splinter became envoys of a promise larger than themselves. Wherever they went, whispers followed, the child and the shardling, the covenant in living form. And though war still loomed at the edges of the stars, though rival powers plotted and shadows deepened, a vow stronger than fear carried forward. They shielded one human child. So Earth shielded an entire species, and the galaxy would never be the same.